Amid the federal response to nationwide protests and talk of deploying the U.S. military and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, Donald Trump has opened a war against Twitter, basing that he doesn't like their fact-checking, thinks it's wrong. Where will that war go from here? Let's talk about that with Joel Pollack, senior editor-at-large and in-house counsel at Breitbart News, author of the upcoming book, Red November: Will the country vote red for Trump or red for socialism? He joins us from Los Angeles. We'll talk about the book in a minute. Joe, my previous guest, the former mayor of Villagrosa, said the thought of sending in active duty troops is a terrible idea. What do you think?
I think the president had to show the nation that he was prepared to restore law and order. And certainly what we saw here in LA over the last couple of days is with the National Guard on the streets, the police were able to focus on what they do best, which is, on the one hand, mopping up protesters who refuse to obey the rules, and on the other hand, talking reasonably, meeting with members of the community, sometimes actually joining in the protests, and conducting a dialogue with people who genuinely want to have a dialogue. So I think having the National Guard deployed to guard some of the roads and to keep a perimeter around some of these protests was very helpful in allowing the police to focus. Similarly, with the military, if there are places like New York City where the governor and the mayor don't want to call in the National Guard, you can't have mobs of hooligans running around vandalizing stores, looting the Macy's at its flagship location. If they refuse, for whatever reason, it seems political, to bring in the National Guard, the president is still the leader of the country and has a responsibility to care for it. And he could invoke the Insurrection Act and move in with the military. The military is highly respected. It's not as if he's declaring war on the country. He's actually trying to rescue people who have no other recourse. We're talking about shop owners, residents, people who are being terrorized by a mob, essentially, that has broken away from or grown out of a legitimate protest and is doing whatever they want. We can't allow that.
How do you rate how Trump has handled this thing so far?
I think it's been excellent. He called for the FBI to get involved in the George Floyd investigation right away. He condemned the murder right away. He got the DOJ involved. He did just about everything you need the president to do. And most of the controversy has been the media attempting to find things to complain about, but he's basically done everything right. I don't think he's done anything wrong. And I think he's actually taken a few actions that I don't think anyone else would have done, but were totally necessary. We saw here in LA, Eric Garcetti delayed and delayed before he brought in the National Guard. Now he says it was the right thing to do. I think Trump, in a sense, gave cover to the mayors and governors who didn't want to make that call. And by Trump making that call in the way he did, forcefully saying that there had to be disproportionate force in the streets so that people didn't even try to loot, I think that was the right thing.
Joe Biden said that that President Trump is more interested in serving the passions of his base than the needs of the people. How do you react to that?
You know, we've had two situations in a row now where Joe Biden has had the opportunity to lead and to unify the country. The theme of his campaign has been unity. But in both of the situations, with the national emergency on the coronavirus back in March, and now here with the riots across the country, he's used both occasions to attack Trump's leadership. And obviously he's running for president. He has to distinguish himself from Trump. So he's got to say something about how he would have done things differently. But the moment to do that is not in the middle of the crisis. In the middle of the crisis, you bring people together. You wait a few days, and then you give the speech talking about how you do things differently.
Do you think the president has tried to bring people together, Joel?
I think he has. I also think that he's under constant attack from the opposition and from the media. So when he pushes back, that becomes an issue. Look, he is a very combative personality, and that's going to rub some people the wrong way. But in terms of what you want your government to do in a moment like this, I think he's done the right thing.
All right, what's your read on his attack on Twitter and that whole Twitter controversy?
Well, these social media companies control so much of our lives online. And what's interesting, of course, this all happened before the curfews for the rioting and so forth. But what's interesting is that most of us are stuck at home. A lot of the stay-at-home orders are still in place for the coronavirus. So we can't really express our First Amendment rights except online. You and I are speaking online because you can't apply the First Amendment in person that we normally would. So these social media companies control the public space. And Trump is saying you have to abide by the rules of that public space. In a public park, everybody has the same First Amendment rights. You can regulate what people do, but you can't discriminate based on content. And he's saying we're going to treat these social media platforms as if they're public spaces. And if Twitter wants to regulate, if they want to decide who's right and who's wrong and which opinions to promote and which ones to silence, then we're going to treat them like a publisher. They're editorializing. And if they're editorializing, they have to play by the same rules as newspapers. They can say whatever they want, but they can't
What if,
libel people. They're going to be legally held responsible if they allow misinformation at that point.
what if they correct misstatements?
They can do that, but you have to do it in an even-handed way. So the problem Twitter faces is that they began by correcting the president. Their correction had to be corrected because they got some information wrong. They said that Nebraska had mail-in voting, and it actually doesn't. So they had to fix their own correction. But the bigger issue is once you start correcting one side, you have to correct all sides evenly. I wouldn't want to do that. In the journalistic world, we do fact checks of debates, and that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to correct statements or misstatements. You have to do the research and come up with what the right answer is. And sometimes you're familiar with an issue. Sometimes you have to start from scratch. I jokingly estimated that Twitter would probably have to divert a third of their employees to fact checking if that's what they decided to do.
Now, tell me about your book and its title, Red November. Will the country vote red for Trump or red for socialism? Do you think Joe Biden is a socialist?
I don't think he's a socialist, but he's definitely the most left-wing nominee any party has fielded in the history of the United States. And actually today in the
More left
Washington
wing than
Post,
more left wing than George McGovern?
yes. George McGovern came out a few years ago for secret balloting in union elections. I don't think Joe Biden would support that today. Joe Biden's moved so far to the left that the Washington Post today said he's running what they call the revolutionary platform. He started out saying he's a moderate. He's not like Bernie Sanders, although Biden didn't actually embrace the label moderate, but he cast himself as the alternative to Sanders. Now he's talking about revolution. He actually used that word himself a few days ago, revolutionary policies. That's right out of Bernie Sanders. So he's not putting the socialist label on himself, but he's adopting the rhetoric, he's adopting the policies, and that's because he's not sure of his own base. Even with all this unrest, which I think some Democrats hope to use in the election against Donald Trump, a lot of the protesters are saying they want to hear more from Biden. He hasn't made the sale to them. They don't feel like he's on their side enough. So he's under a lot of pressure from the left. And so, as Obama said about Biden, he's the most progressive candidate, or he's running the most progressive platform in American history. So, Obama thinks Biden's to the left of McGovern. Maybe you probably have a better sense of perspective than Obama does, but certainly it's something that people feel to be the case, and that's how Biden's trying to sell it himself.
Will the pandemic play a part in this election? Will law and order be a partner? This is such a troublesome year.
Yeah. I was joking yesterday and said, if you told me the coronavirus was going to be off the front page by next week, I wouldn't have believed you. Here we are. So who knows what we're going to be talking about next week? This is really a year of dramatic changes. And I remember back in 2008 talking to a pollster who quietly whispered to me that what everybody was missing in the election, with all the change that was going on with the markets in turmoil and financial crisis, what the voters were looking for was stability. And John McCain didn't really get that. And so when it came to the financial crisis, he suspended his campaign, he ran back to Washington, and he looked like more instability. Whereas Obama really stood up straight, told people things were going to be okay, and he just projected stability. Even though he didn't really have experience at running anything, he looked the part, and I think that was comforting to people. With Biden and Trump, I think they're both trying to do that in different ways. Biden, for a long time, was talking about bringing the country back to normal again. Not talking about that so much anymore because he's under this pressure from the left, but Biden was trying to say, we can get away from some of the disruption of the Trump era, some of the new changes. Let's get back to where we were under Obama. Of course, conservatives remember Obama as a very change-worthy or president very interested in change and breaking boundaries. Trump is saying, I want to get back to the principles of America. That was the purpose behind his walk across the park and holding the Bible in front of the church, restoring the basics. That's the stability he's talking about.
What did you make of that Bible holding?
I think people will remember it for
Joel.
decades. I think it was great. I looked at it as almost great, fantastic. I thought it was a reminder to the country that there's right and wrong. That's what that symbolized to me, that we have a basis for right and wrong. Yeah. Well, he's standing in front of a burned out church.
We're not a country. What Bible do you? It's not the Bible you worship.
It isn't, but I don't think you have to worship that particular faith. I mean, I don't think Trump is, saying that. He's not saying you have to be Christian. I mean, we have a Judeo-Christian tradition, and we're a people of, let me say it, rather than people of the book, we are people of many books. And our country is based on principles. It's based on words, on a covenant that we've made with each other. And Trump says the basis for that is right and wrong. Right and wrong comes from somewhere. And what happened to that church was wrong. And I think it was comforting to people on the conservative side to know that Trump was not going to be afraid of the crowd in Lafayette Park. And
but the church didn't like it. The church didn't like it. They were used as a prop. Joel, come on. Admit something. It's a prop.
With respect to the
across Lafayette, what was that?
The church, I believe, respectfully reacted wrongly. And the idea, yeah, but I'm not Christian, so I can't really be an interpreter of Christian principles. But my understanding is that even if the worst person in the world were to come to the door of the church, the role of the church is to embrace that person, the prodigal son, the sinner who repents, someone who wants to do something good, is to be rewarded or at least welcomed. And you don't have to agree with everything that person stands for or that they've done. But I think that church became a transcendent symbol. It's not just about that congregation and that building. But when it was burning on Sunday night, it wasn't the only religious building that was attacked. Here in LA, we had 2 synagogues that were vandalized by people in that protest march on Saturday. It was a Jewish holiday, and they vandalized 2 synagogues in the Fairfax area. So it resonated with me. I didn't think he had to stand in front of a synagogue or a mosque, but I saw it as more of a universal symbol of we're not going to stand.
Thank you for your time today.